My wife's boss invited us over for dinner. She served us some steaks, but mine was severely undercooked. I sat there fidgeting with my knife and fork. I really didn't want to eat it. Just then, our hostess went to the kitchen. As I looked across the dining room table at the open window of this third-story apartment, I knew I had to act fast. So I grabbed the steak with my hand, gently shook off the juice, and executed a perfect throw right through the centre of the open window. The window wasn't open. The steak left a bloody mess on the cleanest window I've ever seen. My wife turned, jaw dropped, and stared in utter shock. My wife's boss heard the thud, came quickly and took in the scene. The steak sitting on the windowsill, the blood trail, my empty plate. The best I could manage to say was, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I was just cutting it and it slipped. I'm so sorry. I went to grab it and clean the window and continued eating.
Waiters, what's the worst first date you've ever seen? An above average looking guy sits down and says he is waiting on his blind date to show up, and I tell him I'll keep my fingers crossed. The girl shows up a half hour late and she is, to say the least, not attractive. She was probably 120 pounds heavier than what he was looking for in her face. I got an oh well look from the guy when she was in the bathroom. He didn't say anything to me. Just had his dinner. Every time I refilled the glasses, there was conversation with both people smiling. At the end of the meal he paid the whole tab and tipped well. After they said their goodbyes, I caught up with the guy. I had finished all my tables and wanted to know if he was seriously okay with being set up with someone so obviously not in his dating demographic. So I asked how his meal and date was. Then asked if there would be a second date. He laughed and said not likely. I told him that's what I thought, but they seemed to be having a good time. He told me, that girl probably hasn't been on 3 dates where the guy actually paid and was genuinely nice. Why wouldn't I be a gentleman? My friends are jerks, but she did nothing wrong and deserves to be treated like a beauty every now and then.
I was fucking a guy and his toupee came off. I, male 27, was talking to this guy, male 29, on an app for a few weeks. We met up for a drink, he came back to mine, all was going well. We were hooking up, and at one stage I got really into it and pulled on the back of what I thought was his real hair. And the top of his hairline came unstuck. He ran to my bathroom and locked himself in. I tried to talk him into coming out, but eventually he just asked me to drop his clothes by the door so he could leave. This was a Saturday and he hasn't responded since I texted to ask if he was okay the morning after. Is there anything I can say that would lessen his embarrassment? I feel like it was my fuck up that leads to this, and I don't want to add to any insecurities, but I don't know how to do that. Any advice would be appreciated.
Get you some stronger glue.
Yes.
Some got to be. Got to be spray.
What is a split-second decision you made that changed your life? One day, I decided to break up with my girlfriend. The timing just wasn't right. I was only 20 years old, played drums in 5 different bands of some kind, wanted to party, had a full-time job, and was a full-time student in a tough aerospace engineering program. I called her and asked if we could meet in the science building. Why the science building? To this day I don't know. It was close to her dorm and close to parking where I could get this over with quickly perhaps. As I saw her walking, I took a look at her for the last time as my girlfriend. At that point I began reminiscing about our relationship, the ups, the downs, how it began. It had only been about 6 months. I thought as she was walking, I saw her from hundreds of feet away. I dated her because she was marriage material, absolutely beautiful, very mature yet super playful. Any guy would want her. Her laugh was contagious. Not only were our senses of humor similar, they often complemented each other. I loved her. I'd hate to see her cry. It's going to be hard to find someone like her. No, not hard. Impossible. But at least I get these next 3 to 4 years to myself, and I'll have to find another woman as perfect as her to spend the next 40 years with. Wait a minute. It hit me. I'm trading 40 years of pure joy for 3 to 4 years of immature fun, and I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. As she was about 30 feet away from me, I changed my mind. I'm 28 now. This woman is now my wife of 3.5 years, currently carrying our first son, and I couldn't be happier. Have you ever gone to war with a neighbor and who won? Shortly after I'd moved in, he started calling the police about any little thing. My trash can went out too early? Police showed up. Had a few friends over for a housewarming who parked on the street? Enforcement was called to ticket them minutes after alternating parking times switched. After several such petty things happened, I assumed the local cops were just bored and being jerks. Then there was a noise complaint that a cop showed up for, and noted the volume was fine. He kind of let slip who called it in by going to speak with a neighbor, across the road. One day when I saw him out on his porch, I spoke to him for the first time. He basically called me a slur, and told me to go procreate with myself. Here's where things began to escalate. I called in his high grass when he let it get too long. Called enforcement to ticket his daughter's car at changeover. Called the police to report a drunk driver after he'd been drinking on his porch and loudly asked his daughter if she wanted anything from the local burger joint as he got in the car. He did some work on his house, and I called the city inspector. He got fines for lack of permits on that one. The turning point came when he was watching his granddaughter. He was again drinking, and passed out with her playing by the road. I called it in. Cops arrived to find her in the road drawing with chalk, and him passed out on the porch. As the cops woke him, he took a swing at them, which landed him in jail overnight. He got pissed when he found out I'd called it in, and screamed at me from his porch one night, threatening me. When I told him to procreate with himself, he threw a bottle, and damaged my property. He started across the road, but changed his mind when the dog stood up and growled. I called it in and insisted I wanted to press charges when they showed up. They approached him, he got rowdy, and was arrested for the second time in 1 week. A week or so later, he called 911 and filed a report that I had unlicensed dogs running around, snapping at kids. I provided papers for my well-trained and very friendly dogs, all licensed and vaccinated. I then showed time-stamped video footage of the dogs laying in the sun in my fenced backyard that day. The front camera showed no dogs or kids anywhere for hours before, just the officers walking up to the house. After I noted his recent arrests for public drunkenness, the officer decided to do a sobriety test. More arguments, resisting, back in handcuffs, and off to jail. They charged him with filing a false report and resisting arrest that time. The judge gave him a small fine, and warned they'd allow my motion for a restraining order if he wound up in court again within 6 months. He didn't last 4 weeks. One night, he got drunk, and got the bright idea to take out the cameras before smashing up my car. As if they weren't night vision enabled and footage would be lost if he smashed them first. I had video of him swinging at them in the car. He couldn't see the camera on the second story, which recorded all of it. Videos weren't really needed though, since the cops showed up while he was still in my driveway. They chased him a block or two, more resisting, another trip to jail, and he was held for trial this time. That one cost him thousands in damages and the restraining order. Somehow he didn't lose his job, but that didn't stop him from lying about it and refusing to pay. I eventually got a lien on his house and received his income for non-payment. Months later he came crying to me to call off the lawyers because he couldn't make ends meet and was going to lose his home. I told him if he didn't get off my property I'd call the cops on him for violating the restraining order. It took him a few seconds, but he was sober, and decided not to push it. Eventually he put the house up for sale, and both my lawyer and I finally got paid off when it closed. I found out later he'd been doing the same petty things to several other neighbors for years, but nobody had stood up to him. They were happy to see him leave. Safe to say I won.
When I was around 16, I decided to shave my vagina with my brother's electric razor, as they do a better job than the disposable ones. After using it, I cleaned it, because I knew he wouldn't be happy. Come evening time, while I'm watching a film with my mum, on the other side of the house, I get a phone call from my brother. Did you use my razor to shave your vagina? I literally sank in my seat and said no, and he said, I know you fucking used it, it's got your pubes on it. I was so terrified to go back after the film. I secretly went to my room and locked my door, but my brother heard me. Fuming, he yells, "Open your door now!" I was sat on my bed facing the door, refusing to open. "If you don't open the door, I'm going to knock it down." Obviously I didn't, but my brother kicks my door and the whole door and frame came down. I was with no door for 3 weeks.
As a teacher, what's the saddest thing you found out about one of your students? I was teaching high school chemistry, preparing for a laboratory assignment. There are safety procedures to be followed, and one of them is to shed the heavy coats and sleeves before you don the lab coat. She was a quiet and sweet girl. Good solid grades. Not A's, but you could tell she could if she were so inclined. She was certainly bright enough. However, she always wore a big hoodie, and today we were doing a lab. I came to her and told her that she had to take off her hoodie. Quietly, she asked if it was possible for her to keep it on. I found this a little odd, but the rules were in place for her safety, so I insisted. She took off the hoodie. As I took the hoodie, I saw her arms. I raised my eyes to hers and nearly fell to my knees. Her eyes were filled with shame and my eyes were filled with horror. I quietly asked her to join me in the hall and left my class. Once in the hall, I told her we were going to the assistant principal's office and she was not in trouble. I was concerned for her and worried for her well-being. As we walked down the hall, I began to cry. She started to look concerned for me, which is when I realized crying in front of her was unacceptable. I must show her strength and support. When we got to the assistant principal's office, I told the assistant principal about the scars all over the student's arm from her SH. The assistant principal asked me to leave, but the student said she would be more comfortable with me in the room. What she told us was heartbreaking. She started by explaining that her mother was a substance user and had sold certain aspects of herself to pay for the substances. Due to her mother's condition, the student and her younger brother were neglected. She told us how her mother had locked them in their bedroom for 4 days without food or water, or even a diaper for her little brother. This type of neglect had been occurring for her entire childhood. It was all she knew. We contacted CPS, and they removed her and her little brother from their mother's custody. However, she had no relatives and was going to go into the foster care system. As a former orphan, it hurt my heart to think about this poor girl in the foster care system after having such a hard childhood already. I did the only thing I could think of. I asked her if she and her brother would want to live with me. She agreed, and I did my best to take care of them and show them the love that they had missed out on earlier in their childhood. It's been 6 years since then. Her brother is now a little third grader and as happy as can be, and she has just graduated college and wants to become a teacher.